Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to completely transform how you look at legendary sea monsters. We're stepping right out of the realm of pure fantasy, and we're rooting these incredible stories firmly in biological reality and oceanography. So if you've ever looked out at the water and thought, what is really lurking beneath the surface? Well, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right in by visualizing the sheer scale of the unknown for a second. The ocean covers more than 70% of our planet. It's literally the place where life itself began, and it currently holds more biomass than every single forest and grassland combined. Yet, staggeringly, we've explored less than 5% of it. Less than 5%. The vast majority of Earth's largest habitat is entirely unmapped, unsurveyed, and completely dark. And when we talk about that dark, unexplored space, we are talking about staggering depths. The ocean has an average depth of over 12,000 feet. Just think about that massive volume of unmapped habitat for a second. When we frame the ocean in that specific context, the question isn't really whether giant undiscovered creatures could still exist. The much better question is, why on earth would we ever assume they couldn't? So moving to section 1, washed up and hauled out, physical evidence that baffled science. Let's look at what happens when the deep ocean literally drops something onto our shores that leaves the scientific community totally divided. Now, what's really fascinating here is the clash between historical eyewitness accounts and modern science. Back in 1546, this strange creature was caught in the Øresund Strait and brought before the Danish court. They described it as a sea monk, basically a humanoid figure wearing a dark, cow-like covering. Wild, right? But centuries later, in 1853, Danish zoologist Chappatus Steenstrup proposed a different theory. He suggested this monk was actually just the mantle of a giant squid, viewed vertically in really poor light. It's a super plausible theory, but it assumes the observers simply misinterpreted what they saw. It perfectly highlights that tension between an unbelievable physical catch and our desperate need to categorize it. And, we see this exact same tension playing out in the modern era. Picture this. It's 1977, and a Japanese trawler named Dizuyo Maru pulls up a massive, decaying carcass off the coast of New Zealand. This wasn't some small fish. It was 32 feet long and weighed nearly 2 tons. These were highly experienced fishermen with decades at sea, and they literally could not identify it. Now, the current scientific consensus points to a decomposed basking shark, which, to be fair, is known to decay into strange, elongated shapes. But there are lingering physical anomalies, specifically the presence of 4 large symmetrical fins, and amino acid tests that some researchers argue are entirely inconsistent with shark tissue. The carcass was ultimately thrown back to prevent contaminating the ship's catch, so the mystery remains frustratingly open. Which actually brings us to a, frankly, wild category of physical evidence, the globster. I know, it's a funny word, but naturalist Ivan Sanderson coined it to describe exactly what it sounds like. These massive, recurring, fleshy enigmas that wash ashore completely lacking any recognizable anatomical features. No eyes, no bones, no fins. For example, in 1960, an enormous 20-foot-wide mass covered in fibrous hair-like material washed up on a beach in Tasmania. Local media covered it, scientists were called in, and nobody could definitively say what the heck it was. So the takeaway here is that science doesn't always have this neat, tidy answer waiting for us. The timeline of the famous St. Augustine monster is a perfect example of this. It washed ashore in Florida back in 1896. At the time, an esteemed biologist tentatively identified it as a giant octopus. Jump ahead to the 1990s, and reanalysis deemed it to be decomposed whale blubber. Case closed, right? Well, actually, no. In 2004, even more advanced DNA testing yielded results that researchers had to classify as ambiguous. Not whale, not octopus, just something biological of marine origin. Over the course of a century, the scientific answers shifted multiple times, reminding us that these physical anomalies constantly challenge our reference databases. Let's shift gears to Section 2, Myths Encoding Real Biology, Ancient Science in Disguise. We're going to see how some of these unbelievable mythological stories were actually brilliant navigational tools and incredibly accurate biological observations.
Take the Hafgufa, for instance. If you read the medieval Norse sagas, it sounds like pure fantasy. A creature so impossibly massive that sailors would mistakenly drop anchor on it, genuinely believing it to be an island. But look at the specific behavior described in those texts. It feeds by resting motionless at the surface, opening its enormous mouth and allowing the surrounding water to fill with fish before swallowing everything inside. Guys, that isn't a myth. That's a highly precise, documented description of filter feeding. It perfectly matches the real-world behavior of massive resting filter feeders, particularly the whale shark.
But here's what's truly staggering about this: the cross-cultural consensus. We're talking unconnected Norse sagas, Arabic seafaring traditions, and Irish monastic texts detailing the voyage of St. Brendan, and they all independently documented this exact same living island phenomenon. Think about that. When multiple totally unconnected societies describe the precise same, highly specific experience, it strongly suggests a shared real-world observational source. They were all seeing the exact same massive ocean animals.
And hey, mythology wasn't just used to describe biology, it literally mapped the world. The Norse legend of the store worm tells of a serpent so massive that when it was killed, its shattered teeth fell into the ocean to create the Orkney Islands, the Shetland Islands, and the Faroe Islands, while its coiled body became Iceland. If you follow that geographical sequence, this legend accurately maps actual geography, extending outward from northern Scotland straight into the North Atlantic. It wasn't just a fun story, it was a brilliant, highly encoded navigational map used to transmit crucial route info across generations by the absolute best seafarers of their era.
All right, Section 3. Serpents sighted across cultures. Independent accounts, identical details. Let's see how totally isolated communities living thousands of miles apart manage to describe the exact same sea serpents. We're starting in the deep, cold channels of the Pacific Northwest, plunging over 800 feet down. Here, indigenous traditions and European settlers alike have documented a creature known as the Cadborosaurus. What really makes this one stand out is the sheer quality of the documentation. We aren't just talking about blurry rumors here. There are over 300 reported sightings from highly trained maritime professionals, lighthouse keepers, naval officers, experienced fishermen. It's consistently described as 15 to 70 feet long, with a distinct camel-like head. And get this, in 1937, the crew of a whaling service actually discovered and photographed what appeared to be a juvenile specimen inside the stomach of a sperm whale. That physical photograph remains a hugely compelling piece of evidence that just completely defies easy categorization. Now, flip over to the exact opposite side of the continent, along the Atlantic coast. Dozens of completely unconnected indigenous nations, from the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia all the way down to the Powhatan in the Chesapeake, independently documented a massive coastal serpent with one highly specific anatomical detail. It had horns on its head. Now, a horn on a sea serpent isn't just an obvious embellishment, it's a very precise detail, and it perfectly matches a real biological candidate, the deep water oarfish. The oarfish grows to over 30 feet long, has a silvery undulating body, and possesses a striking crest of elongated red spines on its head that, when viewed at the surface, looks exactly like horns. These communities were actively observing and recording real, startling encounters with deep-sea biology. Which brings us to Section 4, Impossible Until They Aren't. The evolution of marine science. Let's look at the historical track record to understand why these enduring mysteries matter so much today. You see, science actually has a really long pattern of dismissing massive, unbelievable creatures as just silly sailors' myths. For centuries, the giant squid, total folklore. The megamouth shark, this massive, totally bizarre-looking creature, wasn't even discovered until 1976. And the coelacanth? That's a prehistoric fish thought to have gone extinct with the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. But then shockingly, it was pulled up alive by a fisherman in 1938. All of these incredible creatures were considered completely impossible, right up until the exact, undeniable moment they were physically proven to be real. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this: our categories are incomplete. As the quote perfectly puts it, the ocean is still producing things that wash ashore and don't fit the categories we have prepared for them. We really like to think we have the natural world fully indexed and understood, right? But the deep ocean is not obligated to conform to the arbitrary limits of our current understanding. It routinely produces phenomena, tissues, and creatures that just shatter our preconceived boundaries. I want to leave you with this final thought. We live on a planet where 95% of our largest, deepest habitat is still covered in pitch-black mystery. Whatever's moving around down there in that cold, unmapped darkness, it hasn't finished surprising us. The next major biological breakthrough could literally wash ashore tomorrow. So keep questioning the boundaries of our natural world and definitely keep looking at the water differently. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.